Ruth, we have plenty of forms if you end up needing more judging forms.
I think we're good.
Okay.
I think we have enough for today. No, the issue was that one of our judges absconded without handing in her form.
That's okay. Oh.
You won't let her leave town, right?
Well, she lives here, so she won't leave town.
Even better. Even better. Okay, so let me do my spiel and then we can get started. Okay, so in this part of the presentation, which is the full presentation, you are taking on a fictional business identity and you are assigning fictional business identities to the three of us as the judges. So please make sure that we know at the beginning who you are in terms of your role and what our role is so we can evaluate your presentation in that regard. You have a maximum of 30 minutes, that's really 25 minutes plus a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dilemmas, dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three of those grounds. You will be uninterrupted during those 30 minutes. When you are finished, we will then ask you questions for 20 minutes, and apparently I've developed quite a reputation today for asking questions. And we will do that in character, so we will continue to role play there. After the Q&A is over, we will then give you feedback. We'll step into our real life roles and give you feedback onto your presentations. Few things I want you to keep in mind. Obviously, this is a business ethics competition, not a business law or finance competition, so the ethical aspects of the analysis are the most important part. These elements should be described in simple, practical, and common sense terms. Using technical philosophical jargon or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. Similarly, reading notes as opposed to referring to notes, you can refer, but reading your part out loud is a big mistake. During the presentation, each member of the team must have some sort of a speaking role. Tomorrow, you will have the option to have fewer people in your team present in the shorter competition. So now we'll tell you a little bit about ourselves. My name is Ruth Kraft. Tom coined the phrase Uber judge for me many years ago. I was a real life live judge. I was a New York State Supreme Court Justice for 14 years, and my specialty is actually employment and labor law, which is relevant to your particular case, and I'm now in private practice. And Skip, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Skip from the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. I'm a senior researcher there.
And I'm Zoe Ng, and I actually work with him.
All right. And so now we're going to set, these things are notorious for going off. Where would you like this to be placed?
Set it here in the middle.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we can all...
Here you go.
Before we started, do you mind if we introduce ourselves?
You can do that now.
Okay, I'm Jared Morgenstein. I'm a sophomore at St. Petersburg High School, and
High school?
St. Petersburg. It's only been a couple of years, and I'm majoring in economics.
I'm Erin Kelly. I'm a senior at St. Petersburg College, and I am majoring in middle grade science education.
My name is Courtney McArdle. I am a sophomore at St. Petersburg College, and I'm majoring in physics.
I'm Jonathan Perez. I am a sophomore at St. Petersburg College, and I'm majoring in accounting.
Can we start?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yes, it's already started.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Well, we are acting as St. Petersburg College. We're acting as a consulting firm which is hired by the Hershey board, actual board of the Hershey company, which is what you'll be representing in this case. And we're here to talk about the controversy surrounding the use of child slavery and child labor in West Africa and the problems associated with that and the controversy surrounding that issue for the past few years. So to introduce this, we would like to present some of the things that we hope to do and hope to accomplish in this presentation. The first of these is to review allegations made against the Hershey Company in relationship to this issue of child slavery and child labor. The second is to analyze using 3 different segments, legal, financial, and ethical, to properly go over this issue and to figure out the best solutions to the problem. And then the final thing is to give recommendations based on this analysis to successfully get over this issue as the Hershey board in the next few years, or hopefully sooner. So in order to make the presentation go more smoothly, I think we should lay out a framework which will tell you exactly what we're going to do at what point. The first part is to give background information, and the background information will consist of research that we've done as a team related to this issue and exactly what we found out about the issue of child slavery and the specifics about it so that we can make more better judgments. And then the next is legal issues, which will deal specifically with legal issues of the Hershey Company, including a lawsuit which was filed against Hershey and which resurfaced last year. The financial issues will include primarily comparisons between Hershey and its main competitors and how this use of fair trade chocolate will affect the finances of the company in comparison. And the ethical challenges, which we'll talk about the morality of the issue. And we'll conclude with our recommendations for exactly how we will solve this issue together in the next, as soon as possible. So to deal with the background information, I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, Jared. So to start off with, we did a lot of extensive research into the dynamics of what the cocoa industry is about, what sorts of problems Hershey's has faced so far. But right now, 70%, more than 70% of the world's cocoa, the world's cocoa that's grown and harvested is in West Africa. So more specifically, in the Ivory Coast, which is 38%, and then 21% from Ghana, which those are the main contributors, the main places where Hershey's buys their cocoa from. And so in that area, there are over 500,000 child slaves in use there. So the next thing that we researched was the Hershey's Supplier Code of Conduct. So that is something, a set of standards that Hershey's has laid out that lets the suppliers know that this is what they expect of them, this is the type of pay that they expect, this is the type of working and living conditions that they expect for their workers to have, and we'll go more into that in a later section. Then next we did some research into their compliance with the fair trade policies, and we'll go more into that in the financial section. Then we also did research into the Harkin-Engel Protocol, which is a statement that was written in 2001. We'll go more into it in the legal section, but it basically laid out the foundation of fair pay, transparency in the buying and growing of the cocoa in those areas. And lastly, we did research into one specific major lawsuit that is going against Hershey's right now. It was brought back up recently last year, and we'll go more into that, of course, in the legal section as well. So what has been done so far? What has Hershey's been doing to better their image, better themselves, and address these issues? So the first thing off is they've promised to be fair trade via the Harkin-Engel Protocol by 2020. And that they have gone from 0% to 18% fair trade chocolate in the past 2 years. Next, they've done many investments in West Africa. The first two, the Cocoa Link and the Hershey Learns to Grow programs, those are both programs Hershey's has set up in the area to help farmers know when optimal growing times are. They'll have access to better technology, and just essentially to try to better the cocoa growing process, to let it give them a higher yield for the suppliers. And then lastly, they've given donations to companies and who work in West Africa to help them better the conditions there. And then lastly, they continue to deny the knowledge of using child slaves, the previous knowledge of using child slaves from their suppliers. So let me rephrase that, sorry. They continue to deny the knowledge that, the prior knowledge that the people who they buy from, the suppliers and the growers, were using child slaves in the production of the cocoa. So to start the legal section off, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney.
Thank you, Erin. So it's a pretty worldwide view that slavery is inherently wrong. It's morally reprehensible. This isn't something that the United States has made some legal changes in its history. And to justify this, as of 1981, every single country in the entire world has made some sort of restrictions or strict legal movements in order to end slavery in their country. Unfortunately, it's still very widespread, especially in the cocoa industry where it is extremely prominent. As of 2008, the U.S. government did a study and found out that 89% of all children in the Ivory Coast are slaves in the cocoa industry. Unfortunately, some of those children are as young as the age of 5. As my colleague Erin had said, there has been a couple documents to try to mitigate the amount of harm done onto these children in the cocoa industry. The first one mentioned was the Hurricane Protocol, which was first formulated by 2 Delaware senators named Tom Erkin and Elliot Engel, and it was basically reforming to end the worst forms of child slavery. It was signed by many international cocoa organizations as well as Hershey's and some international supply chain representatives. It was first written in 2005 with a 5-year deadline, or 2001 with a 5-year deadline in 2005. Unfortunately, it hasn't been adhered to, and it has been rewritten 5 times as recently as this year with a new 2020 deadline here. So there's still some issues with that needs to be taken into account of. Another one here would be the International Labor Rights Forum Agreement, which is also, again, like the Hurricane Protocol, working to end the worst forms of unfair labor in the cocoa industry. Hershey's has not signed this, which has led to some of their business practices in the cocoa industry to be questioned with their ethical intentions. Because Hershey's has not adhered to some of these improvements recommended improvements for child labor and abolishing it completely, there is a massive lawsuit that they are currently dealing with, which is filed originally by the Louisiana Municipal Police Employees Retirement System, henceforth to be referred to as LAMPERS, which alleges that the Hershey's board was actually aware that they were using child slaves for over 11 years. And they had refused to release this information, which is why the lawsuit was originally dropped in 2008 because they couldn't find any conclusive evidence to determine that Hershey's was buying cocoa directly from these manufacturers. But because just because the lawsuit was dismissed as a result of not enough transparency with their information, it actually resurfaced as early as September of last year, so they're going to be reevaluating the situation henceforth. Some of the violations that are mentioned in these lawsuit are pretty pertinent to the case here because there are so many of them. So I apologize, the list is a little bit extensive. The first one is the Alien Tort Claims Act, which states that any tort in a civil is wrong. It states that any individual outside of the United States can seek justice inside the United States if any U.S.-owned and operated company is found in violation of international law here. That's one of the more prominent laws that the Hershey's company has been found in violation of in their lawsuit. The second more prominent one here is the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, more specifically Articles 4 and 5. Article 4, that slavery is inherently wrong and should be prohibited in all forms, but more importantly, Article 5 here, which states that any torture or inhuman punishment is essentially wrong here. This one's a pretty controversial one because the United Nations actually sent a couple reporters to Ghana and the Ivory Coast to see how these children are being treated and what attempt is being done to improve their living conditions there, and found out that they were actually being punished by being forced to drink their own urine or having someone with a machete cut open the bottoms of their feet and being forced to work after said punishment if they were found trying to escape from the farms and try to find a better source of living here. So that's a big issue that has been more of the controversial ones that hasn't been really fixed. The Torture Victims Protection Act is the one that kind of falls in line against that one, that it is illegal for the U.S. against the U.S. against torture or extrajudicial killing. This one falls in line with the, the Article 5 of the last law that I had mentioned. The next one would be the Ivory Coast and Ghana's labor laws, which ties in with the Alien Tort Claims Act. They have some pretty strict restrictions about age limits here. They don't comply with international standards, but the Ivory Coast and Ghana, as well as many other Western countries who are in the cocoa market, their economy and their livelihood is solely based in agriculture. So it makes sense for some of these children to be involved in some of the farming and bringing home a profit for the company, which is why a lot of these children are so heavily involved in the cocoa industries, because it's one of the only forms that they can help bring in money to the family. So they have a age restriction of 12 years old, and they have some very strict limitations on what type of labor they're supposed to be performing, specifically for the prevention of physical and psychological harm here. The next one would be what was mentioned in the Geneva Convention in Convention 105, which is the Abolition of Forced Labor Convention. The International Labor Organization was formulated as a result of the Geneva Convention, and the United States is in this group, as well as every single country who is in the cocoa industry. So Hershey's, being a American-owned company and being in this organization, is to be found in violation of the standards set in the labor organization here. The next one, of course, more obviously, would be Hershey's Code of Ethics and the Supplier Code of Ethics. These are the more pertinent issues of the lawsuit that were mentioned, because Hershey's Code of Ethics does state intimately that they need to be transparent with some of their purchasing material, which is the reason why the case was actually dropped. Also here, they have a strict set of code and guidelines for their suppliers as well. They require that their suppliers be meeting ethical standards with regards to labor and treatment of the individuals working for their company, and since they are not adhering to those were some of the more pertinent issues that were mentioned in the case here as well. With such an extensive list of laws, it does quite obviously violate the U.S. Constitution, most importantly its ideals. The 13th and 14th Amendments do have some strict restrictions against slavery and indentured servitude. Since this is a U.S.-based company and they are found in violations in another country, they cannot be found directly responsible to be in violation of the U.S. Constitution. But as mentioned in the case, because it is operated here and they are getting direct funds based on these farms, they can be found in violation of the 13th and 14th Amendments here. So with such an extensive list, more lawsuits are to be expected in the future if Hershey's does not do anything to adhere to some of these international standards as well. And to explain the financial case, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Jonathan here.
All right, thank you, Courtney. Before I get started, I want to dive down a little background of where Hershey is at financially. Now, currently, they belong to an $80 billion industry, and in that industry, they have a net worth of $23 billion, and they sell to over 70 different countries, being #1 in the U.S., and only about 42% of the market share in the U.S. Now, in 2013, they made a net sale of about $7.14 billion, and in that year as well, they made an $820 million profit. Now, what also occurred in 2013 is that only 18% of their cocoa bean that they purchased were traced by certified sustainable cocoa supplier. Now, what does it mean to be a certified sustainable cocoa supplier? Well, what it means is that the farmers and suppliers that Hershey purchased their cocoa bean are certified by these organizations: the Fair Trade Organization, the Rainforest Alliance, and the UTZ Sustainable Company. And what these companies / organization ensure is that A, the farmers are in compliance with the law, and B, that they're using the best technology to ensure high quality cocoa. Now, even though Hershey does not directly purchase the cocoa beans from farmers who are directly using forced child labor, Hershey is still being affected indirectly financially through their credibility, their competition among the market, and the cocoa bean price. Now, as my colleague stated before regarding the Harkin-Engel protocol, it's been 14 years where the top chocolate manufacturers signed this protocol to ensure to only purchase from ethically sourced cocoa beans. Now, in 2012, Hershey received a 0% on any traceable amount of buying cocoa beans from certified sustainable cocoa suppliers. And what happens is organizations like Green America, the Global Exchange, Food Empowerment Organization, and the Labor Rights Organization uses these reports and discredits Hershey's reputation, which in turn can affect their net sales. Well, I also want to bring up the lawsuit regarding Lampert versus Hershey. The reason for the lawsuit quoted by Lampert is that if former slaves were allowed to sue the company, they wouldn't want their money tied up to an unethical company. Now, this shows a big liability to Hershey, which in turn will actually lose the value of Hershey to their shareholders, and they would want to sell their stocks, which they will sell it in a rapidly lower value to get rid of tainted stocks. Okay. Now, I also want to bring out that uncertified cocoa farmers are not meeting the demand for cocoa beans. There's been a statistic that in 2020, cocoa demand will increase by 30%. The reason cocoa uncertified farmers are not meeting the demand is because they have less incentive to produce the cocoa. They are being intruded by the pressure from the government and neighboring communities, and since they lack technology and management practice, they don't provide the best quality cocoa for the Hershey company, which in turn will actually increase the cocoa price due to scarcity and will affect their net profit. Now, if Hershey would adopt our recommendation, there'd be three things that would happen. They would regain credibility among organizations and consumers. They would escape from possible lawsuit, and they would help increase the productivity of the cocoa farmers. Now let me bring out the credibility among the organization. There's been a Cohn and Roper study that says that 85% of respondents have a more positive image to a company that actually is concerned with their ethical behavior, and that 15% of those respondents would actually pay more for a product or service that would support something they care about. Now later I will show you a chart that this comparison analysis that shows being more ethical can actually help you earn more income. If Hershey actually proposed policies and programs to the farmers, they can actually avoid lawsuits. The reason being is that if the Hershey not really taking any initiative actually shows suspicion to Hershey, which in turn affects them negatively. And lastly, if these farmers are certified, they increase productivity and help reduce the cost of purchasing cocoa bean, because these companies, yet again, ensures that they use the best technology, which includes improvement in management practice and agricultural practice. They have better access to supplies like fertilizer and pesticide, and they have more incentive to earn more income because of the cost of actually being certified. Now here I want to show you this this chart, and it shows you that Hershey only had 2 check marks of initiative to perform some ethical behavior, while Mars and Nestle took more initiative, more plans, more policies to ensure to be a more ethical company. And in turns, as the year gone by from 2011 to 2013, their income has increased. Now, we did not find direct correlation to this, being more ethical, making more income, but it does show that even though you are more ethical, your net sales will not be reduced. Now, I will turn this to my colleague Jared, who will finish this report through an ethical analysis.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the ethics of this, and this is, of course, very important because the central idea about this is what's ethical and what's not. So the first discussion is going to be about slavery and why slavery is inherently wrong. The first justification for the inherent evil of slavery is the idea that all humans are equally human. And this is, I'd probably refer to as the human rights argument. And this means that because every single human is equal in a central biological way, maybe not economically or socially, etc., that they have to be treated with a certain amount of dignity and respect. And thus comes the philosophy or the idea of human rights. And because almost every country in the world has signed on to the Geneva Convention or the UN Declaration of Human Rights, we can almost agree universally that this is an important thing that we have to protect and preserve. The second justification is the social contract justification. So to make this a little bit more clear and personable, we're going to define contract as a understanding of expectation between 2 or more parties. And so what this does is it allows us to say that since every single citizen in every country has a right to be to the social contract. So the individual who's living in that country has to give up some of their rights, but in return, the government or the governing body protects them. And in this case, all the individuals who are being subjected to forced labor, forced slavery, and unfair labor practices are being violated in the social contract because those individuals are not being protected by their government, and the laws in that government are not being upheld properly. The third and final, and I think most powerful argument against slavery is the golden rule. So basically, this is the simplest thing that occurs in almost every culture, the idea that you would want to treat others the way that you prefer to be treated, or the way that you feel every human deserves to be treated. So in this case, we can simply ask ourselves, do we want our children to be subjected to these same conditions, or children that we know, or people in this community, or people in this country, to be subjected to the conditions that we've heard about today? And of course, everyone would say no. So then how can we accept these conditions anywhere else in the world by any other human beings to anybody else? The second ethical discussion is the discussion of a social contract a little bit more in depth. So since we've already defined it, we can just jump right into it. Basically, the crux of this argument is that Hershey as a company, because it is so broad, because it's an international company that is based in the United States and buys from growers in West Africa as well as other countries around the world, it has a variety of contracts that it has to uphold. And among those social contracts, it has to obey United States law because it's based in the United States and run from there. It has to obey international law because it's an international corporation. And it has to obey its own code of ethics, which has to deal specifically with the countries that it's purchasing from, the Ivory Coast, Ghana, among others. So in doing this, as we mentioned in the legal section, there's a variety of laws which it is not currently upholding that it has a requirement or an obligation to do so, or a duty. And that would be including the Geneva Convention for International, the U.S. Constitution, and the Torture Victims Protection Act in the United States, as well as each of those countries, the Ivory Coast, Ghana, and other countries that include Nigeria that grow cocoa for Hershey, and all of those laws in those countries, and if those laws are not being upheld, then Hershey can be held culpable. The third and final slide in the ethics section is the greatest utility, and we're going to talk about utilitarianism, but we're going to talk about it in a way which makes it a little bit easier to understand and more relatable to this situation. So utilitarianism in this case is basically referring to the idea that we need to do whatever is best to achieve the greatest happiness or the greatest benefit for everybody involved, not just for a narrow particular margin of a particular actor in this situation. So we don't want to just focus on profits, we want to focus on everybody involved and how they're affected. The first rule in this case is there should be no slavery. This is apparent based on everything we've talked about so far, and this is the most simple one. And then the second rule, and the last rule, there's only two, is that we have to make sure that suppliers are upholding these same contracts. So what these two rules do is the first one states that there will never be any slavery, and the second one shows that we can enforce that. And the reason why is because unless we actually give a way for Hershey to enforce this issue and bring it all the way down to the base levels of suppliers in the west coast of Africa, then it will never actually be upheld. Because you can make as many promises as you want, but it's not important unless you can actually enforce those promises. So to do the recommendations, I'm going to turn it back over to Erin.
Thank you, Jared. So first and foremost, understanding everything that we've just covered, the first recommendation would be that the CEO of Hershey's publicly states their ethical position. So to go out online is a great resource now. You can do a press release with newspapers, but to state that we know this is an issue, we know slavery is an issue in West Africa in cocoa growing, but we believe that this is wrong and we're going to take as many steps as necessary to eliminate using cocoa grown using slave labor in our chocolate. So secondly, and along that same line, Hershey should align their cocoa purchases with their code of ethics. So make sure that what they are purchasing as far as cocoa is from an ethically sourced supplier. And same with that line, they should also initiate processes to verify that the suppliers are upholding the code of ethics and the code of conduct. So that if that means hiring a third party to go in and inspect and make sure that the suppliers are holding true to what they say, then that would be great. But if the supplier refuses to comply, then we would find a new supplier. We wouldn't just keep buying from them. Then lastly, or not lastly, next, they should make sure that all records concerning the purchases of cocoa in West Africa are transparent for their shareholders. And this would go far to eliminate the possibility of a future lawsuit along the lines of Lampert versus Hershey's. And then you should also sign the International Labor Rights Forum Agreement, and that would be like a gesture of good faith saying we're taking these steps to eliminate slavery in our supply chain, and this would just be the next step of saying that, you know, we're becoming a more ethical company. They should also invest 0.5% of their net profits into existing organizations working to end child slavery in West Africa. They're already donating some, but we believe that a little bit more would go a long way into helping both them but also the countries. And lastly, they should work to implement the Harkin-Engel Protocol before the deadline in 2020. That way they can just show that they are working hard to make sure that they're becoming a more ethical company. And then just to conclude, with all of the things that we've learned and our recommendations, we hope that Hershey's will take these and become a more ethical company with a brighter and more profitable future. Anything else to say?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we can move on to the hot seat. Question for you. The one thing that you didn't mention is the local laws in the Ivory Coast. Does the Ivory Coast have any laws prohibiting child labor?
It does. We did mention that on one of the slides referring to that. They do have a limited for age. It's 12 years old, correct?
12.
And then there's also limitations based on what kind of labor you can do.
Are they enforcing their own laws?
No, and that's one of the biggest issues of why child slavery is so rampant in those countries. They're seriously underdeveloped. There's barely any structure of government, let alone police enforcement. So it's very easy for some of these smaller villages to get away with child slavery because there's no one enforcing them.
Has any thought been given as to whether we should support enforcement initiatives in another country?
Yes.
Have you thought about that?
Yes, that was included in the 0.5 net profit investment in these countries.
Oh, so that's how we're going to spend.
Right, because in order to actually go into these other countries and start attacking the initial problem, it starts at the heart of the country, which is the actual spinal cord, the infrastructure, the government itself. You can't just go into a developing nation with no enforcement in a place where it's practically anarchy and go, okay, we're going to put all these new laws and new regulations and no one's going to be able to stay in there and enforce it. Adding more money into an area to where they can actually start beginning to reformulate themselves as a nation will actually add more support to get them to solve the problem from the inside out.
Is this a highly corrupt country, or is it just a country that doesn't have resources?
They're not highly corrupt. They're just countries that don't have a strong government structure.
How did you come up with those 0.5% of profits? I mean, it seems like a very small amount of money in general terms, but what is it in actual dollars?
It actually in dollars because the profits of the Hershey Company, we're not talking about just the money that they've earned, but the money they actually have as a profit is around 800 million. So 0.5% of that is around 4 million. And we got that number because we looked at the amount that Hershey has spent already and is currently spending in, infrastructure to try to help develop these countries, as well as money that they're donating to certain causes in those areas, and then we wanted to add an improvement on that.
So let me ask you, since the Hertz and Avis argument, how much is what's Nestle doing? Is Nestle giving money to this?
Nestle is actually giving some of their net profits into this issue. That's why, in the chart that Jonathan showed, as mentioned in the chart that Jonathan showed, they are acting significantly more ethical because they are not only acting on the Harkin-Engel Protocol, which they are a signer of that as well, but they are actually donating some money to these organizations.
Is it the same amount of money, or proportionally?
Mars is actually the main company that was the forerunner for trying to develop the West Coast.
Have you reached out to the other two companies to try to form a consortium? Do you think that would be successful?
We thought about that significantly, but the reason why we didn't is because part of this business model is to have Hershey come out ahead of this issue and to try to use the ethical angle well as a way of making more profits in the United States specifically. So we thought that that might undermine it.
What are the costs of the verification process that you referred to?
The verification profit, you mean the idea that Hershey would actually send in a third party to ensure that...
Yes, exactly.
That would be, I don't think we would include that in the...
Well, actually, they don't impose the costs onto Hershey exactly. They impose it directly to the farmer. And from UTZ, it's an annual subscription of $105 in US dollars. I don't know how much it is over there in Ivory Coast, but as soon as they impose a cost on them, they're going to, of course, increase the cost on the cocoa bean to Hershey. But that wouldn't matter because now since they improved their technology and since they're certified, they'll be able to produce more and they can sell it for cheaper bundle. It'll be like a better bundle to purchase the cocoa bean.
Right, so it would be a trickle-down effect because they have to pay someone to verify it. They can make more money on the cocoa, which they're in turn making more profits anyway. So it wouldn't cost a significant difference to actually employ someone.
How do we know whether those third parties are bribable? Has there been any data on that?
Those are very reputable sites. They're used by all the major chocolate companies that have already started to institute these programs to certify that it's organic. And they're the same institutions, I believe, that certify organic food in the United States.
How do you change the psychology of a country which clearly must think that there are utilitarian reasons in employing 80% of its children in child slavery?
That's the trickiest part because part of that is that sometimes the issue is that the parents actually encourage them children to go into the issue, and sometimes it's just an attempt to make money and they end up falling with the wrong crowd. And that we don't have an answer to because you can't change culture, which is why we're trying to go around it by saying buy from other areas that are not doing this, and that will hopefully solve that issue as best as we can.
Doesn't that mean that if the kids aren't working in the picking cocoa beans, they could be used for child prostitution or for some other? I mean, isn't there a risk there?
The cocoa industry and the human trafficking market in Africa are practically interwoven. A lot of the child slaves are products, I say that term very loosely, of the human trafficking market, so they go hand in hand with this.
So do we have to be concerned that if we put a supplier out of business because we say to him, look, you're not compliant with the principles and with the Harkin Engum, we're not going to deal with you, that we're taking those children who work in that for that particular supplier, and we're basically almost guaranteeing that they're going to be trafficked in other ways?
Well, I believe our stance on this is that the conditions in which the children are in are not acceptable under any circumstances, and so therefore, unfortunately, we have to take that route of going around them and hope that whatever other field those children choose to go into would be better than what they're in now.
Well,
but the reality,
we're a board company, and so if the PR is that, oh well, Hershey just got this farmer axed, and now these kids, it's on us. It doesn't matter if it's better off that they were doing that if we're still associated that now these children are...
They're prostitutes.
Yeah, prostitutes. That's...
We already know that it's been successful with the other companies that have done it. Mars has instituted a variety of programs to try to check to make sure that the places where it's buying this cocoa is certified by these same organizations, and they haven't had any negative publicity in the past 10 years.
Why wouldn't we put efforts into, for example, telling the supplier that to the extent that the kids are working picking cocoa beans, that we want to insist that you let them go to school 2 hours a day, or set an affirmative standard?
That was actually one of the things that was in the IBECC company, as well as the other organizations that they have made investments in. They're actually working more on the dirty level, where they're actually going into the farms, making sure that not only the farmers are getting educated, but as well as the children, and they're being supplied with more ethically reasonable forms of living and working conditions. So these organizations are already out there. It's just a matter of funding them. That's the issue.
Also, Hershey, in the Learn to Grow, one of their initiatives is to improve the living condition in Ivory Coast.
And the farming practices as well. They're just starting out with it.
What percentage of the market share do we control vis-a-vis Nestle?
The Hershey in the United States controls a little bit over 40% of the market, which puts them at #1 in the United States.
Oh, we are.
However, in the world, Hershey is #5, and Nestle and Mars are both ahead of Hershey. Nestle's #4, Mars is #1.
What are 2 and 3 now? International?
Foreign companies, Ferrero is
Ferrero Rocher,
it's Italian,
yeah.
and I believe the other one was a Swedish company that does not sell in the United States.
And it's so good.
I'm sure it is.
From Sweden,
And
brings
Liz-
carries
Liz-
bags of it home. Good. Any more questions?
Yeah, this is sort of the same point that we already discussed, but you had proposed that we should go somewhere else if we find non-compliance here. But if 70% of the production is taking place here, and we're taking a large portion of that, where are the fields, where's the cocoa going to come from magically when we say that's enough this year, and next year we don't have any cocoa beans?
A lot of cocoa is also grown in South America as well as the Pacific Islands. And those farms, while there is most likely still human trafficking there, it's not anywhere close to the amount that's happening in West Africa.
How long would it take to get those into production to make them viable? I mean, a tree might take 12 years, I don't know.
They're already producing. In fact, Hershey gets a minor amount of its cocoa from South America and Middle East. But I was also going to add on to that that they don't necessarily need to leave the area. And in fact, what Mars has done is they've bought from different farms in West Africa. The idea is that not all of the Ivory Coast and Ghana and Nigeria are involved in the problems associated with slavery. It's only some of the farms. So if you just choose to buy from the farms that are more ethical, then you've pretty much solved the problem.
And don't the unethical ones who already don't care go to those farms and burn them down, kill the owners, and grab those children?
Well, that's based on the government's description. So
we don't want to start killing people and make it a little unethical.
Well, will we lead to a civil war? If not, a civil war. Civil war is the wrong term, but internal.
That's an interesting problem. As far as the uprising or problems culturally with the area, we haven't noticed any in the past. None of our research has showed that that's been an issue with the other initiatives that have gone on with the other cocoa producers. But if that were to arise as a political problem, then we would hope that some of the money that we're contributing yearly to the infrastructure in that area would help to nullify some of those problems.
And you think this can be done faster than 2020?
Yes, definitely. In fact, other companies, as we saw with Mars, in 2 years was able to jump 20% in their ability in their certified cocoa production.
Do we have a 5-year plan here, a 10-year plan? Do you have more plans that you haven't told us just in this preliminary?
I think that's exactly the problem, is that Hershey in the past has always had 5-year plans and 10-year plans, and after 20 years now, people are thinking maybe you're not going to do anything about it. And so we think that this program, which doesn't actually set one of those dates, is much stronger because it says this is what we're going to do, and it doesn't say in the future we'll do it, it says we're doing it now, which is a strong
What are the
message.
steps?
The steps are everything that we put in our recommendation.
But yes, but so a 5-year plan has steps to get to the 5th year. So
Okay.
are we just going to get through all of the steps with this plan immediately?
I think it's a different system because the steps associated with the 5-year plan usually encompass some of these things that we're trying to do, put money on the issue, and in the future try to buy from different people, etc. So I think that we sort of encompass those within the recommendations.
I'm sorry, did you have something to ask? If I understand, so all of these, the protocol, Harkins-Engel protocol, the international labor rights, all of these are really, there's no teeth behind them, is there, right? So what's the point of complying? We're not in violation. Can't we just make an incremental step that will put us out of the danger zone? And if we're not even actually in the red zone because the lawsuit that was attempted had no merit.
The formulation of the Harkin-Engel protocol was to actually test that exact mindset, and that's why it hasn't been strongly implemented. Only 3% of all children in the Ivory Coast, since it was first written in 2001, have actually been affected by this. That's exactly the type of mindset that they were attempting to test right here. You can't make a legalized document going, if you don't start acting on this, we're going to start charging you. That's what the international labor laws are for. They set those guidelines already. That was just a written agreement, a contract that they had made to actually put these companies out there and give them the spotlight and going, hey, we've made this promise to start making these changes. Now, lo and behold, 20 years, that's why there's so much scrutiny on these companies now that aren't making this effort. You've promised us, look what you signed this document, why aren't you acting upon it? That's exactly what it was for.
Wasn't the problem with the Lampers suit standing, whether Lampers had standing to bring the suit?
Lampers actually found out, it was actually kind of under the radar that some of the people who are supported by the employee retirement system found out that the board was actually well aware of these issues for 11 years. Some of them went into their office and found a couple of the papers that were signed by them, a couple phone call documents, was able to get some reporters out there and speak with these people one-on-one. So they found out under the radar and was actually able to surface it. But since no legal documents by Hershey's themselves released that information in the lawsuit, that's why it was dropped and that's why this issue is still pursued.
Have there ever been lawsuits brought in the International Court of Justice based upon these violations?
We thought about that, and we were actually discussing that when we were doing the research, and we feel that they haven't done it yet, we know that, and it may be difficult for them to actually bring an international company based in the United States to court and be successful with that, but if they were to do it, we would of course support that idea. I think it might encourage Hershey to comply with this a little bit further.
Did you give any thought to whether you would then use these initiatives as part of a marketing campaign for the company that you might recommend to us? And if so, do you see any downside as well as upside?
I addressed that with an earlier question, the idea that we wouldn't want to partner with some of the competition because while this is also, of course, beneficial for everybody involved in Ivory Coast and Ghana, and that's life-saving, this is also important for the Hershey company financially, is that it can compete with the new and upcoming fair trade chocolate market, and including some of these other.
For example, should we on our Hershey bar,
Yes.
our iconic symbol, right? Would we put a logo on this indicating that these are free trade
or
beans?
possibly also TV advertisements focusing on the idea of fair trade chocolate Hershey now, completely slave-free, so to speak.
Any other questions?
So you had mentioned that there were these companies that go out there and monitor.
Yes.
Are there already, and you also seem to imply that there are other companies that have already done this successfully?
Yes.
Is this modeling after them? Are you in contact with them? Should we be in contact with them to learn from their experiences? Like, what companies have succeeded at this in the past 20 years that we can
all the major. Well, we know that there's some smaller companies that deal only in fair trade chocolate. I know that Ben & Jerry's gets a lot of their ingredients from fair trade, a significant amount, not all. But as far as major chocolate producers, candy producers like Ferrero Rocher and Mars and Nestle, some of them have started to institute it, which is what we show with the graph, is that they've been successful in doing that, but none of them have completed it. Right now, I believe the leader is Mars at 50, but they claim 70% at this point, 2015.
So outside of our
market
industry, what about car manufacturers? What about semiconductor producers? What about anything else?
Most of the car market is, I don't know of any car market.
I'm talking about any other industry that's successfully done what you're talking about, which is to change labor practices in countries.
That's a significant issue. I think that this could spur some of that. I know that also diamonds and gold are a huge problem in Central Africa with the slave industry there, as well as human trafficking. So a lot of these things can come.
Have they been successful with that? Have we learned from them? Or can you cite anything that's your successes?
Since a lot of the ways on how they get in contact with their slaves, which is from the human trafficking market, they coincide very well with all the recommendations that we have made here today, starting implementing new laws, more international agreements to adhere to not only the ethical standards of the labor organizations, but within their own companies as well. So there are some pretty basic guidelines that involved with formulating these companies in all these countries. I know the tilapia market is another one that's very prominently run by child slaves from the human trafficking issue over there. There's a whole bunch of them, and they all stem from the same issue: people being stolen from their families, people being coerced into working for their company because there's poor infrastructure, there's no government, there's no police force, in order to make a profitable gain for the company itself. And there isn't too much being done to stop these problems. And with a stringent amount of rules and restrictions and organizations and charity groups actually stepping in and working to solve all of these problems where it starts, that's where you start fixing not only just the issue with slaves in the cocoa market, but with the tilapia market, with the gold market, with the diamond market, and begin to start working on the country as a whole and start working together.
Would you say that regardless of how much we spend on this, our profits will stay the same? That if we put 4 million, we put 40 million, we will still make 820 million because of improved practices, improved sales, market share, whatever it happens to be. Do you argue that, or do you think we'd increase, or we'll actually lose?
Well, I basically stand on a neutral point because you can see that through our chart, Mars didn't make any net losses or didn't reduce in any net sales. So it may not be profitable, but it's better to do something than to actually cause harm and not do anything at all. Which is, in previous cases, I remember the Walmart cases where the children in Dubai, Bangladesh, and how Walmart had a bunch of bad publicity and people took affirmative action for them to change their ways, and look how much they actually changed due to their consumers' awareness. So it really depends. I'd rather do it for safety than not do it at all and be critically harmed.
The idea is that so many factors play into it, because it's not just spending the money will reduce our profits, it's how much will that money promote a whole new market share of fair trade chocolate, how much will that give us a better public image, which will promote people to buy our chocolate. So there's a lot of different factors. It's impossible to predict exactly where it goes, but all the references we have so far historically show that it at least does not hurt your profits at all.
Okay, so this will make the world a better place.
Right. Something
we'll still make money and they can be slave-free.
Yes, something to build on what my colleagues have been saying here is that Jonathan was actually finding some research and found that one of the papers that was written in 2011 found that 80% of consumers would pay more money to purchase an ethically sourced product. People like buying ethical products. It not only makes them feel good, but it makes everyone around them feel good. That's why being eco-friendly is now catching on, because a lot of people like the idea of saving human lives, saving animal lives, and being good. It's what makes a human being, the fact that we have emotion and we can pull on it. So being able to advertise something that promotes human rights, that promotes protection of other individuals across the country. I mean, that's why ASPCA has such successful commercials. Nobody likes seeing a suffering puppy. The thought of saving that puppy makes you want to donate money, and it works very, very well as a marketing strategy as well, and that has been proven.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the final stage, which is the feedback. I do not know what to say. There's one sophomore, one freshman, 2 sophomores, and a senior. You perform better than most graduate school teams, and I've been at this for a lot of years. Extraordinary presentation skills. Young lady, you are remarkable.
Thank you.
I have to say, so articulate. All of you are outstanding. You researched beautifully. You used the graphics. I thought you had just enough, not too many. You divided up the responsibility very, very well. And I'm usually incredibly critical, and I have very little to say that would be critical. I think you did it. The first rule in this competition is pick the right case, frankly. Okay, and you did that. You picked a case that has emotional, compelling issues. You presented a clear solution. It appealed to every aspect of what a board thinks about its public image. It's not terribly expensive, and it's not going to really affect our bottom line. And if we don't do something, we have exposure. So I think that was a very, very smart, thing to do. And I think that your understanding of the legal, where many teams fall apart because they're not law students, and you're a physics major of all things. Go to law school. I will tell you that when I was a law professor on the admissions committee of NYU, I took every physics major who ever applied. Okay, and there's a reason for it, because the analytical thinking is parallel, and it really showed you a very, very good grasp of international law. These are not easy concepts at all. You know, the problem may seem relatively easy, but the backbones of it are very, very complex. I thought you did an incredible job, all of you. You should be very proud. Your advisor should be very proud as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was great, and I could definitely tell in the questions that you had a lot of points that you could bring up, that you had background research, that you had knowledge. One thing with all of those law cases that you were getting into, at a certain point I felt like you were rushing through them. If you felt like you didn't have enough time, choose the most important ones, but at least take a breath. Because, yeah, just a little breath, make sure that you're still breathing.
When we were researching, when we were practicing, I was the one taking up the majority of the time. That's why I asked, I was like, do you get 25 with an extra 5 minutes? I talk a lot, and that's...
Yeah, so I mean, so I think that's definitely, and because there are so many cases, I think if that is something in any kind of future situation, maybe you can have a list of here are some of them, and I'm going to go into detail on the most important ones.
Okay.
Because it's not good to feel stressed, and it's not good to do that. But then one thing that I noticed a little bit among all of you is that, so our role is that we are the Hershey's board. You were a lot of times not talking to us as if we were the Hershey's board, and said some awfully awful things about Hershey's, which it makes sense in the context, but I think there could have been some little bit more politicking in some of your language, and also the way that you referred to some of your own things, your own research and things like that. I think somehow kind of get into your mind a little bit more, like, this is who I am when I step into this room, because there were a few points when I was like, as a Hershey's board member, I don't think I'm pleased about having just heard that.
Could I just add to that, which is that there were a few times I heard you, many times I heard the word they, and I'm looking around,
Who's the
they?
Yeah.
Oh, we're they. You are our consultants, and you need to be consultants, and we need to be the board, versus us, versus we don't know who you are, some analyst, and you're they.
Yeah.
That's how it practically shows up.
Yeah, that was one thing. Also, when we were talking about the graphics, so you wanted to make that point about, I believe it was Mars and Nestle, and so you had one graph that was the check marks and the compliance. Don't show me all of that if all you want to show me is Mars and Nestle, because I got lost in that. And
it's a tough chart.
So I would have taken that information and put it onto your own chart, because the one following was just all of your own data, because that was a little bit confusing. Then I think when you were trying to make your point about just Nestle and Mars, it got lost because it was a little bit of a confusing slide. But yeah, it was great.
I think that in general, that you really do have the compliance end of this, or side of this question, and the solution and issue down. There were a few times that I wished you had brought the ethics back into the ethics dimension of it. In particular, I'm thinking about, you were talking about the increase the value to shareholders, which was, okay, turn it to the bottom line, and we act with compliance, and we do this. I think you also needed to say, and there's a value to the children here, and then these cultures and these people and humanity in general. Don't go as far as I just did, but definitely let me know that this is personal, that this is meaningful about somebody's life or death. I think a little more cognizance that you need to hold the moral picture present.
Oh, what we did was we broke it up into groups, and I basically specialized in the financial law. That's what happened.
Oh, and I agree with that. I'm just saying that there's an opportunity for you to not let that go and not keep yourselves in such silos, but allow some of that to bleed over. You did let some of the others go back and forth, legal, financial, and such, but keep the ethics one present.
And I think with regard to tomorrow, which is solely the ethics, that if you let a presentation by talking about children dying, you would grab your audience in the first second. Everyone would want to hear how can we alleviate this suffering, and therefore why are we buying? You're going to get an easier buy-in as to any program that you recommend. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the American Bar Association has something called the Rule of Law Initiative. I don't know whether you came across it. I've consulted for them in the past, and they are, I believe, in the Ivory Coast trying to set up legal structure, because there's no structure at they've been in Haiti, the Ivory Coast, and Senegal, variety of other countries, trying to set up local tribunals, set up a rule of law, a structure that then permeates up to the higher levels of government. So did you encounter any of that?
I did encounter that, yeah. I counted all different kinds of things. We decided to stick with one of the more locally funded to put in the presentation. There's a lot of little bit of detail that we added everywhere, and as you can tell, it was a bit nerve-wracking to put every important thing in there. So
How long did you work on this?
The entire semester.
Yeah. So like 2 to 3 times a week we were meeting up, collaborating, doing detail.
Yes,
Since January. So, and doing this all in our spare time too. So we've been doing a lot of editing and adding, and like, we edited it as recently as like 2 hours ago. Trying to make sure that every little detail was in there perfectly. This has got to be in this section, this one in that section. So we've been working with it every little step of the way.
Great.
I would just like to put one more thing, and this is sort of building on what Zoe said. Again, as you accept your roles and think of this, there was a lot of analytical argument toward making these changes or doing these things, but there needs to be a little more persuasion and emotional. But this is not about emotion. You need, because you're business people, and you need to make that argument. But it's nice that you're arguing for this, but that's what it felt like at times. That this was a debate and not a impassioned reason.
It's kind of trying to balance the business aspect of it with the emotional aspect of it.
Yeah. Bring it home or whatever. Make it personal.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Great.